This is a program from the Wapaka Area Public Library.
Thank you, and I watch my time very closely. So now it's 10 after 12. Am I saying it in the right spot? So I will stop at 12:52. So can you set that for?
The bell is set for 12:52.
No, the bell should be set then for 12:49.
Oh, okay.
Because I have a special surprise for you at the end in the last 3 minutes, and that will give me time to go through our special surprise. So I'm just going to talk until you ring the bell, and then we'll go to our special surprise.
Very good.
Two amazing love stories, Abe and Mary Lincoln, Harry and Bess Truman. Bang! Papa shot himself. Papa has shot himself. Mary, run over and see what you can do to help your best friend, Bess Wallace. June 17th, 1903. In the early morning dawn, as the birds were just beginning to twitter, as the sun was beginning to poke its head up over the horizon, Daddy's girl lost the man that she so deeply loved and admired. David Wallace was a public servant. But as a public servant, his income was never enough to meet the needs of his wife and his growing family, of whom Bess was the oldest. Again and again and again, he needed help from Grandfather Gates to help support the family's expenses. And because he was always a few dollars short, it led him to a life of depression and drinking, into a downhill spiral that only at the age of 40, he decided, I have one option left, and that's to end my life. His wife, his widow, Madge, this was the seminal point of her life. Everything for her came to a crashing end. Suicide was something that was seen as a sign of shame, disgrace. And to make matters worse, her husband had just been made the president of the local Masons. So it was the biggest, grandest funeral that Independence had ever seen. Thousands turned out. The newspaper reported it in great detail, adding to the family's misery, compounding it. So great was the grief, the overwhelming difficulty of dealing with the most handsome man in Independence, now gone, that Mom packed up Bess and her younger siblings. Off to Colorado they went for a year to quietly grieve and to figure out what to do when they would return. David's wife, Madge Wallace, in the course of their 20-year marriage, had clearly divided her home life from her husband's professional career. She wanted no part of what he did when he went to the office. That was a man's world. She was at home raising children in her world. She clearly wanted those lines of delineation in her life. 18-year-old Bess looked at what her mom was going through and said, if, and it was a big if I ever marry, I am going to be involved in my husband's life on every level. I'd like to introduce you to Margaret Truman. Bang? Dad? 20-year-old Margaret asked her father, "Is that really what happened to Grandpa? Did Grandpa really shoot himself? I never really did know how he passed away." "Margaret!" And Harry grabbed her arm and said, "Don't you ever mention that again. How did you find out?" One of Margaret's aunts told Margaret the secret of David's demise. And Harry was out the door because Madge's children, two of them, lived in bungalows in the back of the grand house up front. And Harry went and tore into that aunt that family secret was never to be revealed. No one was to know. So Margaret then knew. Now can you understand that when Harry Truman began to run for public office, why Bess was always so reticent to speak or to say anything? I don't want that family secret to get out. And in 1948, when Harry Truman made that decision to run for president on his own, did not Bess Truman think long and hard? Harry, you know how reporters are. Someone's going to find out about our family background and our family history, and I do not want that information to be revealed. Let me take you back to a happier time in Bess Wallace's life. She went to church. They were Episcopalians, and little blonde, curly blonde, blue-eyed, 6-year-old Bess was in Sunday school, and in the class right behind her was young 5-year-old Harry, who looked at that beautiful head of curls, and he said, "Seriously, that's the one for me." And at 5 years old, guess what? He meant it. He made his decision in kindergarten. The Truman family at the time lived there in Independence, and he got to go to school with the love of his life. And Bess, being a Wallace, sat right behind Truman, being a T. And in 4th grade, 5th grade, 6th grade, 7th grade, 8th grade, all the way through high school, Bess, can I carry your books home today? And ever so often, Bess would say yes. And Harry would be on cloud 9 carrying Beth's books home. The very fact that Harry got to go to high school is somewhat surprising, isn't it? Not for young men today, that's expected. But Harry got to go to high school and spend those additional years in the presence of Beth because of, a whole bunch of you are like me today, because of Mr. Four Eyes. Because of the glasses. He couldn't see. Harry was legally blind in one eye. And the other eye wasn't a lot better, but Harry was legally blind in one eye. And because of that, unlike most other young men who at 7th, 8th grade went to work, seeing how Harry had poor eyesight, you can stay in school. And if you look at his high school graduation picture, you'll notice that it's dominated by young women and not young men. And that's the reason why. And Harry also was going down a career path in which we would have been introduced to him in an entirely different way. Every morning from 5 to 7 o'clock, Harry sat down and tickled 88 keys. What do you do? Piano. Harry spent 2 hours every morning practicing the piano, and he seriously considered a career as a professional concert pianist. He was that good. During the Kennedy administration, who did President Kennedy invite in to sit down and put on a... Former President Truman came in and could play very well. He was a very accomplished pianist. So what happened in this budding relationship? Well, as the Wallace family fell apart, when Dad shot himself, at the same time the Truman family fell apart financially. And they had to leave Grandview and the close proximity to Bess. And they went out into the country to Grandview, and there with other relatives they began to farm. Harry, with his high school education, went into accounting, into banking, Kansas City, picked up other jobs, and finally in his late 20s, Dad got a hold of him and said, "Harry, I need you on the farm. You can't have a career in banking. Come home." Now today, can you imagine a father telling a 28-year-old, "I need you here to shovel manure"? Harry went home. Worked with Dad and Mom on the farm. The farm was 600 acres. Now how big is 600 acres? When you leave today, drive for a mile. A mile squared. That's what they were farming. And in a good year, they could make money. Harry could make as much as $4,000 a year working for Dad. And that's pretty good money. But if you know anything about farming, you know it's not what? One good year after another? It's rare to get a really good year. And the Trumans went through some really tough years as well. Bess still lived in a family now that had the appearance of wealth, but they weren't wealthy. They lived in a very nice home. We would call it a mansion. And yet they were struggling greatly to get by. Bess had no lack of suitors. She was what we would call today a 4-star athlete. And she was really good at... She was really, really good at tennis. She loved to play. And Harry, Mr. Four Eyes, he went to the library and he read every single book in it. Was not interested in sports, but he was interested in learning and education, and he went through every single book in the entire library and added to his education. So how did Harry and Bess get together? Grandview is 4 hours from Independence. The old-fashioned way. If you take a horse and a train and do some walking and make all the connections. Here it is, the year 1910. Harry's never dated. He's now 26 years old. Pined away for Bess all these years. He hasn't seen her. He hasn't seen her for 9 years, not since high school. But it just so happened that across the street from the Wallaces were the cousins. There's 2 of them here, Ellen and Ethel, who were teachers. And Harry went to visit his cousins, and Ethel said, Madge, Bess's mother, had no use for the kitchen whatsoever. But she did like to bake cakes and pies. And Ethel said, Harry, we've got a cake pan from Bess's mom. Would you like to return it? Yes, it was a mad dash. It was a mad dash across the street. Harry knocked on the door. Bess answered. And they went out and sat on the porch swing for 2 hours. And thus their relationship began, and Harry's courtship of Bess began for the next decade. So we have an amazing love story in formation. Harry met Bess when he was 5 and she was 6. And Bess, who had had other suitors who came from around the state to ask her out and to pursue her. And Bess kept turning them down because Bess had a way of winnowing out who was acceptable. Let's go for a picnic, was Bess's standard response. Only let's walk. Let's walk a long ways and get to know each other. Bess, who was a really good athlete, oh, the park is only 12 miles out. And away, she would test them pretty good, away they'd go. But it was at that picnic that Bess could sit down with the young man and decide, is that somebody I would like to get to know better? So Bess used that picnic as a way to determine whether this was a man she was interested in, who would stand up with her. And then we get to another amazing young couple. There was some real sadness in the Truman family with the death of Grandpa by suicide. But in my mind's eye, I can see young Margaret standing and looking back through the decades of time and seeing a little 9-year-old boy carefully crafting out some pigs. And he's using these pigs because Dad asked him for his help to make something. Who knows what I'm talking about? Abe, Margaret asked, what are you doing with those pigs? Oh, I'm making these to fit into the coffin for my mom. Abe Lincoln's mother, in 1819, when Abe was only 9 years old, so we would say in 4th grade, but for Abe that meant nothing because his entire schooling consisted of less than a few months total. Abe had almost no formal schooling whatsoever. And at the age of 9, his mother drank some tainted milk, and called the milk sick, for lack of a better term, and died. And Abe's left without a mother. Well, Abraham's father recognized, I can't run a farm and 2 other siblings here all by myself. I have to find a helpmeet Abe, I'll be back in a couple of months. Please take care of yourself. And your 12-year-old sister will help you run the farm. Well, Dad, when are you going to be back? Well, I don't know for sure. And off Dad went to the neighboring state, where he knew another young lady had become a widow. And he went up to her and said, I'm here. Make up your mind. You can pack up, bring your children, you can marry me, and we're leaving today. She didn't give Abe's stepmom, Sara Bush Lincoln, much time to decide. And to her credit, she said yes. And you're right, in many respects she didn't have a choice. They were going to have to join forces to hold things together. And so when he got back home, Abe, here's your new mom. It was the stepmom who taught Abe how to read by the light of the fireplace, and who would take the shovel for the coal, and on the back help Abe to do his numbers and his math. And Abe owed a great deal to this woman who was incredibly patient and kind and loving to him. She was his mother, she was his teacher, she was his mentor. Dad had no use for learning whatsoever. But Dad did love to tell really funny stories. Guess who inherited that love later in life? But it was Mom who made sure that Abe got at least a limited education and got that love for reading. Abe would walk miles to get a book. And then when he would borrow a book, he would bring it back home. And at night there was no shelf to put it on, so Abe would go up to the side of the cabin, and he'd pull some of the bark away, and he'd carefully put the book into the bark for safekeeping until he could read it the next morning. In 1828, Abe is now 19, 10 years older. And the sister whom he adored, who he really treated almost as a second mom, what was her name? Sarah. She died in childbirth. Second loss. Less than 10 years later, here's our 16th president. Weeping uncontrollably as the rain is beating down on top of him, as he's standing over Anne's grave. The love of Abe Lincoln's life, not Mary Todd, Anne Rutledge, a woman who was kind and gentle and soft, and she was pretty. She was pretty too. And Abe was deeply in love with her. And Anne too got sick very quickly and died. And Abraham sank into deep and profound grief to the point where he stood over her grave marker trying to protect it from the rain that was beating down on top of him. And it was Joshua Speed, Abe's law partner and good friend, who said, Abe, drown your grief in work. You're going to go nuts, Abe. You need to simply keep yourself so occupied you won't think about what you lost. That's really what Abraham did as a young, up-and-coming lawyer. Drowned himself in work. And now this man, who was a very powerful man in his years spent on the farm and being a rail splitter, Abe Lincoln was so strong he could hold an axe straight out with one hand. And this tall, powerful, 6'4", gangly individual, who if we had to walk alongside him, I think it would have driven us nuts. All of us, when we leave today, we're going to walk like this, right? Not Abe. When Abe walked, it was entire foot up, entire foot down. Entire foot up, entire foot down. Talk about a gangly look. For the next 2 years, Abe, who really enjoyed the company of his fellow lawyers and judges as he traveled on his law circuit, who felt very comfortable being around men, but did not feel very comfortable at all being around women. The loss of his mom, the loss of his sister, the loss of his love life, the woman he had treasured above all others, found it very difficult to try and mingle with the opposite sex. And finally, it was at a party in Springfield that a young lady had just come from Lexington, Kentucky, and she was staying with her sister, and she was cultured and dignified and refined, and she was the life of the party, and she was a flirt. And it was Joshua Speed, lawyer's law partner, who said, Abe, come on. And he pushed Abraham across the room, and Abe went up to Mary Todd in 1840, now 3 years after the death of Anne. He said, Mary, I would like to dance with you in the worst way possible. He did. Was Mary's response when she got back to her friends. But Mary looked at this rather uncouth gentleman who didn't care if his hair was combed and his pants were too short, and he would wipe his arm with his things that drove Mary nuts. And she said, you know what attracts me to you, Abe? And little Mary, who was 5'2", eyes of blue. And isn't there a song about that somewhere? What attracted her to Abe was the fact he was a Whig. That's the political party that he had affiliated with, and so was Mary. And when women weren't allowed to talk about politics, Mary, who was also, like Bess Wallace, Daddy's girl, would sneak out of her bedroom as the men were talking politics in the parlor downstairs, and she would get closer and closer, and she would hear what all the men were talking about, and then she'd lean around the corner and go, well, I think Henry Clay is right. Henry Clay, one of the great 19th century American politicians, lived just 2 miles up the road. So Mary had politics literally in her front doorstep. And Mary liked that. And Mary realized women have no place to get involved with that. But I'm going to jump in anyways. And then she did. Well, how did Mary end up in Springfield and didn't stay in Lexington, Kentucky? It's because Mary understood some of Abe's pain. Her mother passed away when Mary was 6. She was the 4th of 7 children. You can imagine how hard it is to get your dad's attention when you're one of 7. But Mary was really good with the tears. And she knew how to wear Daddy out. And Daddy really loved his daughter because they could talk politics and all kinds of things that most young ladies didn't talk about. But then Daddy remarried. And here's where it sounds like the story of Cinderella. The wicked stepmom! And the new wife and dad were to eventually have 9 children of their own. So now it's a household of 16. And Mary began to realize, I really don't fit in here because I'm clashing with my stepmother. I want my mother. And so Mary went to great lengths to irritate and aggravate her stepmom. And, don't open that. Don't open that. knew that her mother, when she went to bed at night, would take off her nightgown and crawl under the covers without any clothes on. And one night, her stepmother climbed into bed with 12 spiders. Well, I guess stepmom got up in a hurry. And the very next day, stepmom called Mary in and said, "We've decided, out." And they sent her off to boarding school. And then from there, Mary realized, I'm going to have to find somewhere else to go. And so she ended up in Springfield, staying with her sister. So here it is, 1840. Abe meets Mary. He's nice. We can talk. And when they weren't talking about politics, Mary, who was highly educated, knew how to tickle Abe's fancy. Let's read Shakespeare. And Mary would read Shakespeare to Abe Lincoln. Which play do you think really hit it off with Abraham? Hamlet. Hamlet was one of Abraham's favorite. And Mary could sit and read to Abe, and then they could discuss the Shakespearean plays that she was reading. So in 1840, they get engaged. Kind of. And Abe looks at Mary, who had come from a background like Bess Wallace of reasonable wealth. He says, "Mary, I can't let you marry me. Not only am I poor, I'm in debt. The grocery store that I ran in New Salem a couple of years ago, I still owe money on the inventory that we had to get rid of. Mary, not only am I poor, I'm poorer than poor. You can't marry me." And they broke it off. And Mary dated other men, but by now she's becoming an old maid. She's 21, 22. She is way past the age of being married. She flirted with, who did Lincoln debate in 1858? Yes, Mary, ooh, I really like Stephen Douglas. Just one problem. He's in the wrong party. And so the two of them just couldn't connect because of that. And Abe didn't really date anybody. He drowned himself in work again. He sort of dallied with another Mary Owens. And yet, finally Abe, almost a confirmed bachelor, now in his early 30s. Okay. And some friends got them back together late in 1842. And finally, Abe said, "I'm willing." And in early November of that year, he went back to his boarding house to get ready for the ceremony that was going to be put together in 4 hours' time. When the cake was baked, they had to set it out. They couldn't even put the frosting on it because the cake was still too warm. And the young man that Abe stayed with looked at Abe and said, "Where are you going?" As Abe was putting on his best shirt, slicking back his hair. Abe looked at him and said, "The hell, I suppose." And thus the marriage began. And Robert showed up nine months later. And there was son number 1. Thank you. Robert's best memory of Dad was Dad packing all of his legal briefs on the horse and riding off for 2 or 3 months at a time as Abe traveled with his law practice, and he would be gone for 2 or 3 months at a time. That was Robert's memory. But after Robert came 3 more sons, and little Eddie is the one you don't remember, because son number 2, who was born 3 years into the marriage, got typhoid, and before the age of 4, died. And Mary screamed and said, Abe, give me another son. And Abe said, it doesn't work that way. A month later, Mary said, we're going to have a Christmas baby. And that was Willie. That was William, who replaced Eddie. And it was William who became a favorite son. Mary and Abe clearly had favorites among their boys. And Eddie, who was the favorite, was replaced by the favorite Willie. And then Tad came along later. How in the world do you get a name like Tad? That's not his actual legal name, but that's how we know him. Because when he was born, Abe looked at him and said, wow, man, does he have a big head, just like a tadpole. And it stuck. And he was called Tad for the rest of his life. The rest of his very short life. He only made it to 17. So there we have a rocky marriage built primarily on, we share the same political leanings. And Mary was happy when Abe went off to Washington, D.C. and served one term as U.S. Congressman. And Abe got to be there when our 6th president died with his boots on. At his congressional desk, John Quincy Adams. And Abe was there to condemn the American-Mexican War. He was not in favor of that. But following his one term in Congress, Abe went home and he practiced law. And he and Mary tried to build a family. And as the boys came along, Abe had to tell Mary, the taste is in my mouth. The taste to run for office is in my mouth. I want to be a politician. I want to do more. And thus we get to the 1858 Stephen Douglas Lincoln debates, in which, did Lincoln win? He lost, but because of the way he spoke and communicated and presented himself, he began to put himself on the national stage, and people began to recognize there's a man who's a very great communicator who's got something to say that we'd like to hear. And it certainly brought notoriety to him. Just got to watch my time here. How much? What?
48.
40? Okay.
1 minute.
Oh, great. All right. So, inside that Lincoln marriage, February 5th, 1862, Mary comes down. They're going to have a grand ball. She's refinished the White House. Mary's dressed in all of her finery. She looks absolutely fantastic. Lincoln is actually dressed up and cleaned up, and they keep leaving the party, and they keep running upstairs and coming back down. Where are they going? And upstairs and downstairs, and Mary's dressed just beautifully, just all bedazzled and all decked out, and yet at the height of their grandeur, they were about to experience severe sorrow because Willie and Tad were both sick with contaminated water, and the second son dies. Mary promptly went into severe grieving for almost 9 months. It wasn't until January 1st of the next year she finally took off her mourning clothes. And 7 months later, here as Lincoln is going through all the difficulty of fighting the Civil War, and everything's going wrong, and everyone's condemning Lincoln, and nothing's going right, here up in Gettysburg, Pennsylvania comes the news. The North has got a great victory. Finally, the Army of the Potomac has finally won against Lee. They finally turned him back. And then comes the news from this General Grant that Lincoln has never met, that we have taken the bastion of the Mississippi. We have taken Vicksburg. We have split the Confederacy in two. There is no way the Confederacy can stand. And here it should have been a high point in the Lincoln marriage. And at the pinnacle of national success, Lincoln, come with me. You think your wife will live? She was coming back into Washington, D.C. from the soldiers' home that they stayed at, and she was thrown from the carriage and badly hurt. And it led to a lifetime of opiates and drug dependency for all the physical pain that she was starting to undergo. You can go ahead and ring it, okay? So, I'm just going to cut in for one more minute with the Trumans. Married at 34 years old. She was 33. Harry asked her to marry him. She turned him down in 1911. In 1913, she said, you can now call me Bess instead of Bessie. You can call me by the name that all my friends call me. And she says, if I ever marry anybody, it will be you. And Harry said, I'll hang in there. And 4 years later, they were finally kind of unofficially engaged. And it was that 1915 Stafford that made that 4-hour trip from Grandview a lot shorter. And Harry went dashing into town every Sunday to spend that time with Bess. And in 1917, when they had finally agreed to be married, Harry turned to Bess and said, no, you can't marry me. I have heeded President Woodrow Wilson's call. I'm going to go fight. And I don't want you to be engaged to a man who may come back in a box or a man who may come back crippled. But if I come back whole and in one piece, we'll get married. Well, obviously, you know what happened. They came back and got married. And so there, at the age in their mid-30s, they were privileged not only to celebrate their silver anniversary, their golden anniversary, and 3 more years after that. And they're in the White House, or rather the Blair House, because it was President Truman who spent a significant portion of his presidency refurbishing the White House. In the Blair House, night after night after night, this amazing love story that began at the age of 5 found Harry and Bess sitting on the couch doing this. In their mid-60s, holding hands. Deeply, totally, thoroughly committed in love. And I'll finish with this thought. Abe and Mary Lincoln. And let's not get around the fact, if you want to have one caricature of Mary Lincoln, she was either in the attic and really excited and wonderfully happy and willing to talk about Shakespeare and politics and all the cool things that she could discuss with Abe, or she was in the basement. And she was depressed and everything was wrong and the tears came and nothing was right and she'd fly into a temper. There was no first floor Mary. She was either up here or way down here. And it was on April 15th, 1865, that afternoon, that Abe took Mary out for a drive. He said, Mary, the last 2 years we have been so miserable. Ever since the death of Willie, we just haven't been the same. But today, I recognize that the Civil War is over. And we can finally get on with our lives. And we can be a happy couple once again. And he leaned over and he rubbed Mary's arm and he said, that's kind of fun, isn't it? Let's go to the play, even though you have a headache. And they went to the play, and as they sat next to each other, Mary thought to herself, we're like teenage kids again. Abe has rediscovered a love and an interest and a desire to be with me, and how wonderful we'll be able to celebrate our silver wedding anniversary inside the White House. Oh, how happy we are. And then came the funniest line of the play in An American Cousin. You sock doggleguzing, I can't say it, old man trap. And Lincoln leaned forward to laugh at the line that he knew so well. And you know what happened next. Okay, sorry, I ran just a little bit over, but I do have a special surprise for you. Can you help me pass these out? If you would each take one. I'll send these down, 1, 2. And then you can keep these. I don't want these back. This is something I wanted to give to you. We got a couple more. I'll grab some more. I need a couple more. What? We have enough? Are we? Oh, okay. And I'll collect those when we're done. And got one? Everyone's got one? Okay. I write poetry, and with this being Valentine's month, I thought, well, this is a poem that seems to me to be reflective of especially the love that Harry Truman had for his wife, Bess, but also as Abe learned to not only put up and tolerate Mary, but as he learned to love her and to cherish her as well. So I thought this was a poem that we would read this way, and then you can keep these. So you notice there are 6 lines in each stanza, and I'm going to read them with you. So you're line 1, line 2, line 3, line 4, line 5, line 6. And then we'll just go around and read the poem. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So we'll start right here. Love requires a commitment that few want to give. Love requires an unwritten contract that few sign. Love requires a commitment which fills a very real need. Love requires a joyful heart from the beginning. Love requires a commitment men must take seriously. Love requires women who value this type of man. Love requires time to grow and increase slowly. Love requires a moment to be captured again. Love requires time to learn and relearn life's lessons. Love requires a second, an hour, a life to live. Love requires time to nestle within its confines. Love requires a holiday to remember who. Love requires a promise to be faithfully kept. Love requires a vow to have and hold from now on. Love requires a promise to honor each and obey. Love requires more than appreciation. Love requires a promise to still hang in there, baby. Love requires the spoken and written word binding. Love requires service always given joyfully. Love requires occasions to help in time of need. Love requires service, never with a bitter frown. Love requires moments to shed tears in sympathy. Love requires service to be surprised at thank you. Love requires a lifetime to grab and hold tight. Love requires a higher calling from both of them. Love requires a sense of direction to its end. Love requires a higher calling to be honored. Love requires a path not easily turned away. Love requires a higher calling to pray over. Love requires a loving God to guide and direct. Love requires kindness to listen and then to speak. Love requires a tender ear to really engage. Love requires kindness to act and wait patiently. Love requires 2 legs, 2 arms to work for her. Love requires kindness to give a hug with open arms. Love requires a heart with ears that know to respond. Love requires. Thank you.